For the 2015 edition of Simei, Unione Italiana Vini confirms its commitment to build on the success of the previous edition and to continue to organize debates of global relevance. Today and tomorrow, you will experience what is the natural sequel of the International Congress that was held during Simei 2013. During this edition, we will continue to develop and explore new solutions for wine sustainability and at the same time advance on the state of the art by integrating an essential dimension of the concept, the one related to the use of sensory factors and their role in the sustainability metrics. In every definition of sustainability, it is stated that it is a balance of social-cultural, economic, and environmental needs of today and tomorrow. But the main focus is often only on the environmental pillar. Previous attempts to judge sustainability in wine production have left out or considered secondary the sensory quality aspects and their link with the social and cultural aspects, allowing wines to claim sustainable labels while they lack taste quality. Taste and its expression through the techniques of sensory analysis is one very important indicator for sustainability. This dimension of sustainability has always been considered implicit due to the general perception that any new product needs to be better than the previous in all aspects. However, it is time that we make this pledge for sustainable wines that have certified sensory qualities and an explicit one. The need to include sensory factors in short-term and long-term evaluation of sustainability has not only trade relevance, one related to the correct information to consumers, but also significant cultural relevance. Good wine is not only a simple product, it is part of our tradition, cultural heritage, and social life. The congresses of this year will develop these two different but strictly connected topics with the involvement of the most authoritative international experts and representatives of all stakeholder groups. Prominent personalities have been invited to participate in two complementary steering committees chaired by Professor Ettore Capri and Anita Oberholster. We hope to advance the thinking and explore new horizons with the support and their participation during these 2 days. We planned for 2 days of interactions and constructive debates with all of you, with the aim of defining a common approach that we can then further communicate globally. Stakeholders from the whole of the wine value chain will be fully involved. Farmers, service providers, operators of sustainability programs, processors, retailers, and the trade in general. Consumers will be called to participate in an event that will exploit modern techniques of interactive participation. On different scales and from different angles, people are trying to build their own project around the theme of sustainability. Not concretely translate to concretely translate a word that sometimes is now abused. Some initiatives have a global scope and are trying to overcome national boundaries. I'm referring to the OIV, FIVS, CHEV, and it is no coincidence that the stakeholders are all present here with their representatives and have granted their patronage to our initiative. We want to create a positive and welcoming roundtable atmosphere to facilitate sharing of our ideas, encouraging the construction of a community of companies, academia, and all other stakeholders that shall become driver of a global movement for the enhancement and protection of investments aimed at increasing the sustainability in the wine industry. By joining this initiative, you are joining a real community developed to collaborate on a large scale and trying to provide objective and measurable answers to the questions posed by the trade in terms of sustainability. Today we will try to sum up what has happened in the last 2 years, what is the state of the art of the main initiatives regarding sustainability worldwide, and also to stress the holistic approach that the word sustainability should imply. The conclusions will be built together with the Congress audience that is invited to contribute to answering the main questions we have in defining not only holistically wine sustainability, but also in translating that into individual company and product sustainability. Thank you very much and buon lavoro.
Thank you very much for being here. It's great to have all of you here. So why is important? We know why it's important sustainability, but why is important this event? This event is really relevant because, it's actually an international date for discussing and having a very intensive dialogue concerning sustainability. And actually today, we have also to measure one step ahead the last and the first meeting on international sustainability analysis for the viticulture that we got in 2013 in the last Simei meeting. So at that time, using this fantastic methodology that is especially from Natasha, without her this event will be never possible, and without you, of course. We got a reflection paper that was an analysis and a summary of what we achieved at that time. And actually in this slide, we want just to report in 5 bullet points the conclusion of that reflection paper that you can download from the website of the Simei. So first of all, so what we got in that stakeholder analysis was a clear evidence that sustainability is based as balance between the social, economical, environmental aspects. So, this is in theory, it's reported in so many papers, in so many places. But that time, for the first time, we got the evidence based on the stakeholder analysis. So we also understood at that time that there are a number of different international and national programs that actually are based on as activity of association, as activity of single farms. And was clear at that time to get an harmonization as soon as possible to ensure what we call the domino effect in the different arena of the food chain, in our case of viticulture and wine chain. So not only for the producer, but also for the consumer and all the stakeholders involved in this chain. Then we also demonstrated that the sustainability is a great opportunity for everybody. So I cannot report, so please read the paper, because there are lots of opportunity, not only in terms of new product, market developments, and also to achieve what we need for sustainability in terms of better use of resources. But it's a very good opportunity for training, it's a very good opportunity for the education, it's a very good opportunity for our own life. And then, of course, this means a challenge, which is the 4th bullet point. The challenge is, of course, that we need to understand much better what is the economic viability when you implement sustainability. You need to get an assessment and an evaluation in terms of sustainability, also of the legislation and the policy framework, which is very important. Otherwise, we want to be sustainable, but then no, the system itself, the legislative system is unsustainable. And then we need really a sustainable communication with all the consumers and society. That at that time was really a great gap. But of course, to achieve that, the reflection paper report that we need to improve a lot. To improve what? To improve the innovation, to improve how we involve the stakeholders, because I mean, this process is not a process that can be just based on your own activity, but needs participation and inclusion of the stakeholders, just to get an added value for what are the public goods and ecosystem services that are based on sustainability approach. And this means to develop, of course, a new business model for all the stakeholders. So I mean, you see that in that reflection paper that was really not so utopic and idealistic, we got for the first time number of how sustainability should move. And today we are 2 years later. And today we are 2 years later when we have to, first of all, as Natasha said, we have to track where we are, what actually is and has been the improvement. And then we have also to start working in this new business model in having a look at the different aspects of sustainability, opening our view at 360 degrees. So what is relevant is really to include as much as possible the social aspects and the economical aspects, because I mean, concerning the environmental assessment, and the environmental sustainability, maybe we have got more data and quantitative information. So that's the reason that today we are brainstorming the sustainability, and we are opening tomorrow to what is the sensory analysis, because we really believe that cannot exist sustainability without having a very good wine that gives to the people the best appreciations in terms of sense. We are opening, this is fantastic from my side, this new sensorial way, where we to the traditional sense of that are attributed to the wine, we include a new sense that are part of the sustainability framework. So that's my just starting point, this slide and these bullet points, and this is, of course, opening to your consideration in your table work.
Thank you very much, Ettore. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Anita Oberholster, an extension specialist in enology based at the University of California in Davis. As steering committee chairperson of the second day, I would like to welcome you to the Simei International Conference, Discover the Sensory Factors, measuring the quality and social and cultural importance of wine, with a particular focus on sensory analysis. The main theme of the conference is the field of sensory science in all its facets. How can sensory analysis be used optimally as a tool in the quest for sustainability? Day one of the conference will focus on sustainability in the environmental and economic sense, whereas day two will focus specifically on the science of sensory analysis and its potential role in sustainability. So far, sustainability has mostly focused on the environmental aspects, with much less emphasis on the potential quality impact and the social and cultural aspects. First, we need to define, what do we mean by quality? Now, in the very least, it refers to a well-balanced wine with no obvious wine faults. However, a subsection of quality is making a wine that is acceptable or even preferable by a specific consumer, and is thus marketable and thus a sustainable product. In the next 2 days, we will highlight the important role sensory science can play in sustainability and investigate how sensory tools can help you obtain sustainability, not only in your own socio-cultural environment, but also help develop the tools needed to translate it to global sustainability. May the next 2 days prove to be very stimulating and thought-provoking. I hope we will walk away from the conference equipped with many new ideas on how to become more sustainable, not only in our own individual environments, but also globally. Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation here. And most of you may ask, why sensory? What has sensory to do with sustainability? Well, first of all, sensory is trying to bridge the gap between the wine production, most of us are involved in wine producing, and the consumer. And we're clear, a wine which does not serve the needs and the desires of a consumer is never a sustainable wine. So what is driving, what's the objective of us, of winemakers? We always want to make wine which is authentic. Authentic due to its biological heritage, mostly defined by the varieties. Defined also by the geographic heritage, which is defined by the terroir, which is extremely important, as I will point out tomorrow, because it is not copyable around the world. It's definite for each place around the world. And also for the cultural heritage, which means we have very specific wine styles due to traditional methods we're applying at the Amarone area, which is different to the Barbaresco area and different to other areas. So we always try to make this heritage perceivable. On the other hand, consumers have a very different approach. They're basically looking at the hedonic verves. They want to have wine which they like, which is palatable to them. And most of this pleasure is driven by sensory traits. So it's important to understand what are the sensory bases for these heritages we're talking before. So also we can look with sensory at the same time which wines are preferred, which wines are liked, and which wines are disliked. And there are techniques to combine these both words, the wine production and the preferences of consumers. And by this way we learn, we understand more, and we are able to do more sustainable wines. I'll just make one example. We're all concerned a little bit around the world about increasing alcohol consumption. Wine, of course, is mainly a cultural drink. That's how we perceive it. But it is also an alcoholic beverage. And when we do sustainability, we have to address this point. And fortunately, the modern technology allows us to remove alcohol from the wine, or to produce less sugar in the vineyards, or to ferment the wine, making less alcohol. So that's some things, but alcohol always changes, again, the sensory characteristic. We're concerned about climate change, where we have more sugar production, so more alcohol, so we are concerned that our wine styles are changing. And that's, for example, what we did in one big study in Germany. We looked, how does the removal of alcohol change the style? What is the level, what is the threshold when we go below? Maybe the cultural identity of the wine is changing because we don't recognize it as a Barbaresco, as a Barolo, or as a Amarone anymore. So I think tomorrow we will talk in more length about this. That's very, very interesting. And I just want to congratulate the OIV to look for this interesting linkage between sustainability and sensory science. I'm sure that the discussion we have here on the floor around the stakeholders table will not only improve our sustainable production, but also the needs to follow the needs of our consumers to make more successful wine, better quality wines, maybe triggered by the help of sensory science. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So feel free to use the microphone. Yes, exactly. Thank you.
So, good afternoon. As we know, and our previous speakers have both said, that we've most of us that are here are familiar with the key points of sustainability, which are interdependent. For me, the main thing that we need to get is a balance between the three spheres. I'll analyze that. We'll look at where are we now for both producers and consumers, and then where to from here. We're all very familiar with the representation of sustainability as being environmental, economic, and social, with true sustainability being the common factor with each of one of those elements. Given that these three elements are interdependent, I like to look at them as a cog. Every time one of the elements in one of these spheres changes, increases, or decreases, the other cogs obviously are interdependent and will move with that. The economic, you obviously have your profit, your cost savings, and your long-term economic viability. For the environment, we're looking at the entire supply chain. It's not just viticulture, it's also about your vinification, your packaging, your transport to the consumer, but beyond that, it has to be more holistic in that you have to have sustainable production from your suppliers, whether that's your bottles, your fertilizers, all your vinification and viticulture products, right through to the transport needs to be sustainable, and to your distributors. So upstream, the production, and downstream. There are often trade-offs in the scale of production too. Mass production, which enables consumers to have access to wine financially, but economically and environmentally, they are not necessarily viable in the long term. For example, in regions of Australia, we have mass tracts of monoculture. When there's water deficiency, it can mean that farmers let their crop drop because it's more economically viable not to pick the grapes and vinify them than to actually pay people and go through to the end process. This obviously is a loss in all three of those spheres. We also have an example closer to home of Prosecco with flooding and erosion, whether that is rather controversial, but that's an example of how farming can affect the environment. Sustainability is not directly related to price and quality, which is going to make our sensory analysis very interesting because cheap wines are not always unsustainable, and the most expensive super premium wines are not always sustainably produced either. So if sustainability is all about balance, if we look at sustainability as being our earth, we have the economic pillar, we have the environmental pillar, and we have the social pillar. And this is about balance. If one of these is improved or decreased, then we're going to have a problem. For example, imagine deciding to bottle at destination. South Africa, which is very far away from most of its major markets like the UK, Europe, and the States, went on a major campaign for environmental reasons to bottle at destination. The impacts of this decision impacted all three spheres. There were great economic benefits because it reduced transport costs. A lot of those economic benefits were in fact for the importers and distributors. The environment had a benefit because it reduced the carbon footprint. However, the social and the local socio-economic factor was drastically affected in a very negative way because a lot of people lost their jobs because local bottling plants went out of business. So when the social is so badly affected, you no longer have balance and it's no longer sustainable. In fact, on that same point, Tesco in the UK has now decided, in fact, to start using more wines bottled at source in South Africa, specifically for the socio-economic factor. But one of the other problems with this method of bottling at destination is that the producer, who has spent an entire year or more doesn't have this final control on the quality of the wine. So for sensory analysis, that's quite important as well, just underlying the balance. So another example of side effects of what we commonly perceive to be sustainable is organic production, for example. Most people and most consumers say, I buy sustainable wine, I make sustainable wine because I do organic production. Organic production, in fact, only deals with one tiny aspect of the entire chain of production, chemicals in your vineyard. If you have a very wet year, for example, you have to use more copper or sulfur to treat against your fungal diseases. That means you're going into your vineyards more often, you're compacting your soils more often, you're using more fuel, and so your carbon footprint is much higher on one tiny aspect of your production. That doesn't mean that you cannot farm organically and be sustainable, but one needs to look at a much wider picture and be sustainable in all your other spheres as well and make up for that increased carbon footprint. The example of horses instead of tractors is very glamorous and going back to nature. I asked the head winemaker at Pontet-Canet in Bordeaux what he thought of that. And I said, is it really environmentally more friendly than using tractors? And he said, well, actually, if we're being very honest, it's very good for our image, so that's good for the economic aspect, possibly. However, if you have to calculate that the cabins on the horse-drawn carriages are air-conditioned for the social aspect of our workers, that adds to the carbon footprint. And if you also bear in mind the fact that we have to grow food and get it transported to the domain for the horses, it's probably equal to tractor use in terms of the carbon footprint. So there are side effects, and that's why balance is all important for me in sustainability, and why we have to take a holistic approach. So, where are we now? We'll do a little case study to give you some concrete information about a holistic approach to water management, which affects all three of these pillars. In October 2015, so very recently, Speer, which is a winery in South Africa in Stellenbosch, won the Nedbank Green Award for water management. They embarked on a campaign which is actually supported by the South African government called Work for Water since 1988, and they removed thirsty, invasive aliens, for example, eucalyptus or acacia trees. Eucalyptus can drink up to 6,000 liters of water per day. So when you're in a climate where water is not in abundance, that is a lot of water. You need to irrigate, you need to use municipal water, which is costly and your carbon footprint is higher. So the removal of these trees was replaced by 53,000 water-wise and locally indigenous plants. That increases your biodiversity. The water tables increased, so there's less need for irrigation. There were both environmental and economic benefits because of the scarcity and the cost of water, which is increasing. Moreover, there were social benefits. Because this program, Work for Water, trains staff, which we can see in one of the photographs, to remove all the trees. We can see on the left the photograph of the hill before the trees were removed, on the right, during the tree removal. Employment is increased, staff training is increased. The wood is then recycled into furniture by previously disadvantaged communities. So that gives them a social and an economic benefit. And your life cycle assessment of the wood is vastly increased rather than just using it to burn or for other things that people would normally use it for. So you have both economic benefits and empowerment, socio-cultural upliftment, and environmental benefits. Moreover, the domain uses a wastewater recycling plant using bioreactors and reed beds. 100% of their wastewater is recycled. The clean water is then used to irrigate the gardens and grounds. They also have hotel complex there. And it would take 350 kilometers of a river in order to purify the water that the treatment can do in 1 day. So it's highly effective. Obviously, there's a financial cost to put this in place, but the long-term benefits are enormous and multiple. Indigenous plants are also better in the region because they combat fires. When fires are devastating, they can create erosion and flooding, which also produces more long-term problems. One of the major advantages, both environmentally and economically, for this is that this wastewater treatment plant has enabled Sphere to reduce the water used in production of 1 litre of wine from 5.6 litres to 1.96 litres for an equivalent size winery. So if we have a look, here's a picture of the bioreactors and then going into the reed beds and the water plant. Moreover, they also use this wastewater site as an education site for school children. So they are using it as a communication tool for youngsters who will then be involved more environmentally and become future wine drinkers, hopefully. One of the other projects that this winery does from a very holistic point of view is that they have enabled their workers, so their full-time employees, to create vermiculture, so breeding earthworms. So they use the plastic sheaths, which protect young vines from planting, as the tunnels to produce earthworms. And then the staff, it's their own company, so they have full-time salaries, but within that they have their own company, and they sell the earthworms to local farmers in order to improve the quality of their soils. So it makes local employees even more economically dependent. Given that South Africa's background, we were at a disadvantage socially than Europe and many other countries, although we were environmentally far more advanced in many ways. So we have, on that scale, we had a lot more improvement to do socially. Environmentally, we were good, but we're always improving. Here we can see just a couple of examples of dreadful fires that happened in the Stellenbosch area. These fires created millions of euros of damage. After the fires, they obviously the erosion was terrible, and that has socioeconomic costs as well. Flooded vineyards, eroded roads, very environmentally bad and economically dreadful. So, where are we now? I'll skip, well, go because time is of the essence. Alberto Antonini, an Italian producer and consultant in his wineries in Uruguay and Chile, has chosen to use concrete tanks. Now, this is very interesting concerning the sensory analysis aspect. They feature low in carbon footprint than stainless steel, cheaper cost of production, a longer economic life, and better quality wine, according to him. You get a better sense of place in the wines. The benefits are both environmental and economical. You get quality wine, and what is very important is that consumers tend to be moving away from overly vinified wines. Consumers tend to be looking for more, in various markets, obviously, purer wines, less extraction, less oak, more natural styles of wine, and so this choice of concrete helps that. Having better informed customers helps to progress issues, fundamentally, and if producers understand their customers, then we can make more progress faster, which is another reason why the holistic approach, not just to what the producer does, but including consumers and suppliers, is very important. So, on the Master of Wine program, for example, we are always asked, please identify the origin, the quality, the method of production from what is in the glass. That answer comes from the interaction of all three spheres. The environment, whether you've got lime soil or granite soils, how much sunshine you have, how much alcohol or acidity is in the wine. The economic aspect, Obviously, is it cheap or expensive, and what type of production is it? And also, the regional cultural sensory perception is very important. Does somebody from Germany, a production of wine from Germany or Central Valley or the Alto Adige, have the same sensory profile? No, they have completely different sensory profiles if you're producing Pinot Grigio in those same three areas. Wine is a direct transfer of the environment through man, bearing in mind economic factors. Sensory analysis can lead to quality and responsible production and improved education, educating the palate. It can also help to combat obesity. The World Health Organization, it's a small element, but it can if one increases the education of taste. The World Health Organization has released studies that we're all probably aware of, that the main levels of obesity are in non-traditional wine-producing countries and non-wine consuming countries. The land, the environment, and the appellation and its specific qualities, and the image and cultural heritage of wine areas are the tools of our trade. Damaging any one or all of these will obviously have a future impact. There are obviously external influences, for example, the plan to put the fast train, the TGV, in the Sauternes area. That's an economic project, but the Sauternes producers say that it will destroy forever the intrinsic quality of Sauternes. Sustainable development is not, however, anti-progress. On the contrary, it is using experience and science to be better, to be more efficient and more human for better quality wine. So where are we now? You can see a collection of well-known stamps and labels. The top three square ones are for certifying sustainable production in South Africa, New Zealand, and California, and the rest are a collection of organic or biodynamic symbols from around the world. It's a very confusing message for the consumer. So education and communication are key issues. The sustainability space is very confusing for consumers. As I mentioned earlier, the organic example. Most people think that organic is sustainable, but we all know that it is not essentially. So where are we now? We need a common understanding, which is a prerequisite to engaging trade and consumers in order to inspire action. Certifications in South Africa, California, and New Zealand all include the economic, the environmental, and the social aspects to varying degrees. However, all started with viticulture and the environment. In order to move on and to progress, we need to ensure economic is as important and considered, because that gives us real social security. Where to from here? One has to be holistic in order to be sustainable. All three are essential and interlinked, as I've illustrated. Balance is extremely important. Constant change of economies, nature, human behavior, consumer demands and trends, and even more so with climate change. As Ulrich mentioned earlier, with warmer climates, alcohol is increased. All of those are in constant change. So one needs to be flexible, but flexibility comes with balance, and one needs to ensure economic viability. In terms of policy making, flexibility and a holistic approach is very important, but the only fixed rule needs to be to guarantee and oblige a year-on-year improvement in all of these sectors. We can't say, I'm certified sustainable, and then not do anything for the next 10, 15, 20 years. So it must be easy to get onto the first step of a certification or a policy, and then be able to improve after that. Because if you've got the psychological barrier of saying you have to be up here to get onto that step, nobody's going to want to get into the system of being certified. So if you make it easier and there's room to progress, you get everybody on board. If we want to be credible as an industry and build a sustainable future, then we all need to work together, to be on the same page before we bring the consumer on board. And last but not least, since we're in Italy, a little quote from Galileo: "Wine is sunlight held together by water, with man's intervention." And whilst there is truth in Galileo's quote, I'm quite sure that he didn't face such complex issues as socio-economic impact of climate change. As an industry, we hold the key to preserving this environment, which is why a holistic approach to sustainability is essential. And basically, it's making better wine better. There we go.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. And in a short time, less than 8 minutes, I would like to show you what happens in the OIV as intergovernmental organization. The OIV has established some guidelines on sustainability in 2008, and now we have updated this guideline according to the 3 pillars of the sustainability. And I don't detail what the previous speaker said, but I would like to stress on the five principles of the sustainable guidelines. The first principle is the sustainable approach have to take into account the 3 aspects: environmental, social, and economic aspects in balanced and simultaneous way. So we have talked about the second principle. The sustainable viticulture respects the environment. The environment, the protection of the soil, of the air, of the water, and we have said the result of the vote, and also the biodiversity. In terms of respect of the environment, we have to include also the management of input in terms of energy, water again, and the efficiency and effectiveness of the use and reuse of water, and the optimization of the technical inputs. Management of output also, rationalization of water waste management, and also the prioritization to the best practices and to establish a production strategy in the company. Principle 3 concerns the sustainable viticulture is sensitive to social aspects. We have to consider the impact of their own activities on social aspects, not only for the company, but also on the social and economic development of the region. In terms of the working condition, for the training of the workers, and the integration of with the social and economic environment within the region or specific area. And don't forget the consumer. The consumer is also a very important players in the social aspects principle. Principle 4, social viticulture seeks to maintain economic viability, and it's very important for the industry. Of course, economic viability of the business should be considered with a very important strategy. In terms of resilience, the adaptation to changing business conditions, and also the efficiency. Efficiency, it's the ability to avoid waste or extra cost of the production. And finally, the fifth principle, the sustainable viticulture requires planning and assessment. I think that it's important also to stress this principle, because planning have to take into account the 3 aspects of the viticulture sustainability. but also the assessments should be conducted based on clear indicators, clear parameters and criteria, and also, and the previous speakers have talked about accreditation, and it's important that this assessment should be done by a third party. And in conclusion, I would like to stress that the communication and also the sustainable viticulture is also imply and conduct within an innovation process. It's important to mention that innovation could be a part of the sustainable viticulture. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We decided to put this slide to speak about which is the European Commission approach. This is the big bang of all the work of the European Commission. The European Commission has been looking at all the different labels who have started to appear in the market, and they decided to do something, to harmonize. As you know, the European Commission is a huge machine, and they decided to work almost 5 years ago on this, and they start to build a methodology for the calculation. So the holistic approach that the European Commission has put on the table is based, first of all, on science, and secondly, mainly or exclusively based on the environmental pillar. They consider that for the moment, science is only able to give an indication of the performance, not the sustainability of the wine sector and other sector. The European Commission is a huge machine, and they have developed these guidelines, this methodology, which arrives to a tricky level of detail. And it is so based on science that they decided in the first moment to take apart one of the big part of the vineyards implication, which is the carbon sink. Because there was no sound science, not enough studies on how the soil and the vineyard retains the carbon, they decided initially to put it aside. So because of trying to give a perfect vision of what is the environmental performance of the production of a wine, they were losing part of the message. Secondly, as I told you, the methodology arrived to a very detailed level of calculation. You have to calculate how much costs the production from an environmental point of view, the production of a tractor, of all the machinery, all the additives you use. Sorry, we don't use additives for the production of wine. Technological aids, etc. The problem is when we have this calculation, we will have to simplify, because I jump to the second question, how communication should be done. Is the consumer prepared to receive this kind of complicated message? No, we will have to simplify. First of all, we will have to simplify on the impacts we will be communicating. The European Commission works on 14 impacts. It is too much. So by simplifying, we'll have to decide, as we have done, is water more important than energy? Is the impact on the depletion of the soil, etc., more important? Yes or no? But the problem is, if we communicate at a global basis, as you understand and you know better than me, it is not the same impact that a winery may have in the region of Valpolicella on the water than when it is produced, the wine is produced in Sicily. So the simplification and the global communication has some limitation, and we have to establish them. Second point on communication is, will we communicate on a business-to-business basis or on a business-to-consumer basis? If we communicate on a business-to-business, it is good because in theory we will try to increase the performance. The problem is that if we communicate to a consumer point of view, as we said, we'll have to simplify. And this pushes to the third point, which is the question. How we communicate on sustainability. First of all, the Commission has decided to communicate on the performance, not on the sustainability. And secondly is, if we have to simplify and we have to give a general vision, we'll have to make a benchmark. And the Commission is pushing us to decide which is the average level of impact for the production of a wine. as you may understand, if we take a bottle of wine, if it is sparkling wine, still wine, or red or white wine, it is not the same benchmark. Will I be obliged to compare my bottle if it is a long-term reserve product from a fresh wine? It is the same performance? Maybe yes, but it is more sustainable or not? This is the big question. We can communicate on the performance, but what about the sustainability? Who will be deciding? Will be the consumer? Will be using traffic lights? Who will have to decide if it is a green, orange, or red light we should put on the labels? And finally, this communication, they may impact on the rest of the pillars of the sustainability. The Commission will, based on science, will say a glass bottle, for example, may have a bigger impact, environmental impact, than another kind of packaging. Yes, okay, from an environmental point of view, but what happens about the quality? Maybe this packaging is taking a role on the quality of the producer. So, point to be taken, we cannot communicate exclusively on environment without taking into consideration the rest of the pillars. And with this, I close before I pinch out.
Thank you very much, Ignacio.
Great. It's wonderful to be with you all. And I'm happy to see some consistency with the definition of sustainability. We also share that core message that it's really about balancing environment, social, and economic considerations. And the idea is that you're using that to inform all of your actions and decision-making in your vineyards and wineries, ultimately leading to healthier communities and healthier environment, stronger communities, and vibrant businesses. And so that's, I'd say, the core message that we always try to get across. And as you know, with a holistic concept like sustainability, it is very complex. So we have some ways of translating that very high-level definition or core message, and we call it the Code of Sustainable Wine Growing in California. But there are a number of other certification programs, educational programs that really help translate that core message for growers and vintners. The other element is FIV's, Global Wine Producers Sustainability, Environmental Sustainability Principles. So those, along with programs, really, I think, helps get that core message across. In terms of audience, our core audience is always growers and vintners. Ultimately, this has to be done at that very operational level. So it really comes down to how sustainable wine growing gets translated in very unique settings. In California, we have great diversity. Around the globe, you can imagine what diversity we have. So it ultimately comes down to how it gets implemented. And so we have all kinds of educational tools and techniques to help reach growers and vintners. I would say the next level of our audience is really public policy makers and influencers, and that again starts at that regional level. Communities where we operate, it really matters that we are sharing that we are good environmental and community stewards, and then it goes all the way up to state level, to national level, and then international trade issues. So definitely it's one of the core things that Wine Institute talks about when we talk about California wine with that very important audience. And then, of course, it's also another key audience would be trade and media for us. And probably even more, though, than before consumers, because they really are the gatekeepers for the information that consumers receive. We don't have the budget or the marketing capability to talk about sustainable wine growing down to that consumer personally. And so this is a way that we can actually really influence how it gets talked about by really educating trade and media, and they in turn can help us educate consumers. We do have a certification program that I think is another way that we're able to share important information, and it kind of distills down this complex idea to some really tangible things that people must do to get certified, and it has that third-party credibility. Ultimately, we're striving to get it so that it can be on the bottle, which I know a lot of other programs have, and that is a way that we can educate consumers and get that message across. And then I'll end with, we're supposed to talk about what our key question is for this two-day event. And I am curious to answer the question, how can we collaborate internationally to position wine as the sustainable beverage of choice? And this is where I think we have the opportunity, given all the activity that's happening around the globe in wine regions, collectively, separately, even down to the vineyard and winery level. We are so well positioned to really have wine be that choice. And so how can we work together? I want to learn about the status of other programs. I want to understand how sustainable practices ultimately influences quality. And I want to see how California can contribute to that, and also how we can stay at the forefront of sustainable wine growing. I think this type of international collaboration is essential. We're very active with FIV's sustainability efforts. I think they really help level the playing field, and similarly with OIV's efforts in this area. With conferences like this, I'm so happy to be here again. I was here 2 years ago, and it's great to see the conversation continue. And I think ultimately that's going to help us with our global message. And I think that really just bolsters the credibility of all of our individual efforts and helps stakeholders better understand what we mean about sustainable wine growing. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hi everybody. The first thing I want to do is show you a little video,
The word
2 minutes video.
sustainability derives from the noun sustain, the piano pedal that makes the notes last longer. Sustainability therefore indicates something that lasts over time. Our quest for growth, success, and prosperity is destroying the system that we depend on, nature, and therefore our planet. There are 7 billion of us now, and there will be 9 billion in 35 years. Today, we use a third of the planet's surface to produce food. In 35 years, we will need twice as much food. We are literally eating the planet, and it's not just us humans. Today, there are 24 billion farm animals on the planet. The problem is that they eat 10 times more food than they produce. The average global temperature has increased by 0.7 degrees since 1850. If that ever rises to 2 degrees, there will be drastic consequences, including sea level rise, melting of the glaciers, desertification, and the spread of tropical diseases. What can we do to make things better? The Earth is a system, and everything is connected: society, environment, and economy. To help our planet, we need to start living more sustainably, and to do so, we need to start thinking sustainably. This means evaluating the impact of our actions from a social and economic point of view, and minimizing our impact on the environment. Sustainability cannot be a static protocol. All intervention must be contextualized to the sector or place concerned. Our task as a group of wine producers is to be aware of what is happening to our planet, establish our own objectives, and use research to evaluate the effects of our actions and reduce their environmental impact. This world can only continue to exist if we remember that we do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, but borrow it from our children.
Okay, so that was just to say that what we love to communicate, it's a new way of behavior for people, not the things that we are doing inside to be more sustainable, because that, I think, it's the message we have to do. We know if this kind of behaving reach the people from the inside, all the world will behave better. So sustainability is a trend, and it's not a trend, it's a necessity. Well, as you know, sustainability is, we have to talk to all the opinion leaders and consumers and producers to promote sustainability. And, no, that was, it doesn't work. So I can just talk without the slide if you want.
We can focus on you, that's nice.
Yes, thank you. And so what we are doing, Sicily, we belong to Sicily. Sicily is a very lucky place because you have a lot of sun, not a lot of rain, so you don't have moist. It's pretty easy to be sustainable. And what we trust in is not a special procedure to be sustainable that tied us in some laws where we don't feel comfortable. So we invent with some other companies of the wine sector, like Planeta, Sectasoli, and now other companies are agreeing us, a project called Sustain. Sustain is a proactive plan where every company makes his own goals to reach year by year. And we try to measure, we try to look in a holistic way. So we look the economical side of the matter, we look the social, we look the obviously the environmental, and we found 10 different things to measure of all of these components. What it's important to say is that there are no rules, it's only an energy that comes from the inside the companies that want to reach every year goals. And then we have a website where every year we communicate all the things that we were, that we achieved, all the goals that we achieved, but not also this. Also, we communicate also the mistake, the one we did not achieve, the one we were planning to get, but we couldn't, we weren't good enough, because we need to be reliable. If everything is only good and nice, and if everybody always get their goal, you are not reliable. We are men, we are not, how you say, perfect. So you have to talk in a real human way to people. And you have to, if you want to see what we do, you can see it on the website. We have 300 pages for each company, 300 pages for each company to tell you everything we did last year. But we want to promote in this kind of way, trying to get new behavior. And for last thing I want to say, because maybe I'm over, it's holistic for us. It's not only to see all the point of view. It's also to don't look only at the wine part of the sustainability. We are farmers, first of all, and so we have to look to everything regard agriculture. Our dream is to make for Sicily, and Sicily should be a cell for visitors developing all over the world, for Sicily a table where enterpriser and scientific people look forward to plan sustainability for all the agricultural part, not led like everything in the world by financial aspect, but only by real necessity. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this exciting invitation. I didn't know that it was possible to show a video, so I'm going to give you some ideas around this boring slide. So, talking about communication, is sincerely speaking, it's easier for me to talk in English about sustainability, because in Chile we're still have some discussion about the right translation of the word. Some people say it's sustentable, and other people say it's sostenible. So you can imagine it's even more difficult. In the Wine Chilean Association, we use both terms as synonymous. So, but anyway, it's easier to talk about sustainability. I'm going to show that what we're doing in practice, and the concept should consider always the social, economic, and environmental aspect, but in an integrated manner. I really love the slide before, because they are related with this concept. The sustainability should not be seen as an isolated part of the business. It's very important in terms of the strategy concept to put the sustainability in the high decision level, especially for wineries, also in terms of communication, not try to build a sustainable area in each winery. This should be a wrong approach, because the sustainability is not part of the business, it's the business itself. We have developed a comprehensive standard that we have actually 55 wineries certified in Chile with this sustainable code, with different recognition by SAQ in Canada, LCBO, and the last Mark and Spencer last week, and we are in the system of sustainable recognition. And also, another important idea in terms of to include social, economic, and environmental is try to include the value chain, the stakeholders, the commitment with consumers and clients. We have signed in the last year an agreement with Wine in Moderation initiative. I don't know if you are aware of that. And it's a very important initiative in terms of to build the culture of the wine, and also the right communication to the consumers in terms of consumption. And also, it's very important to include the research and innovation. We have a project, not only this standard, we have a a very comprehensive research project. We include social responsibility, biodiversity, winery, water management, safe energy, and different aspects that we include in our research projects and also in our standards. In terms of communication, it's very important for the communication strategy to include the stakeholder. And what I wrote there is try to focus on different stakeholders. It's very important. We sometimes put a lot of energy in try how to communicate externally, but not internally in the company. That's mean it's very important to create the commitment of the winery and try to in the capacity building of the company in terms of to show the sustainability. And also the message must be a meaningful message and also an honest message, very simple one, in order to create confidence and value. One of the main challenges is how to build together a common concept of sustainability in the wine sector. I know there are different standards around the world. We have created our own standard, which is voluntary in nature, and but it's very difficult to try to, especially for the social part. Sincerely speaking, our experience is everybody talk about social, but it's very difficult to integrate in the company because we are talking about to change the culture of the company. It's not just to create the seller or try to change input. It's how to create the culture of sustainability in the company. That's why in terms of communication and in terms of decision making, it's very important to put the sustainability in the high level of decision of every company.
My talk is a little bit different. I decided to actually look at sensory and how that might actually challenge the sustainability side. As you've heard of the speaker so far, as a company, obviously there's a lot that we do to do sustainability and sustainability targets on water efficiency, etc. I thought I'm not going to talk about that. I'd rather say, so because the conference is about sustainability and sensory, how would sensory influence perhaps sustainability decisions? So obviously you've heard about the financial, the triple bottom line, environmental and social, and that these three pillars are actually all three needed to work well for us to be sustainable. So just production-driven versus consumer-driven. We've come from a past where probably a lot of us was actually production-driven. We made something and expected the consumer to like it and to buy it. Whereas we all realize today that actually the consumer is the person that buys, and you actually need to understand what he likes or dislikes and then make your product for that. Now that's where obviously sensory research play an extremely important part. So we've used sensory research in the past to actually understand what our competitors is doing and obviously also looking at what consumers would like. And with that information that you get, you take it back to, so if your wine style is not the one that I prefer, how do I change my practices in the cellar, as obviously also in the vineyard, to actually make that style of wine? Now we've had examples where some of the outcomes actually were good for sustainability, where we could say, well, actually the wines are, or your vineyards is too much vigor, etc., so reduce your water usage, etc. But there's also other examples where wine styles, if you think about sustainability, might say, but I need more electricity or for my processing because I need to do it at cool temperatures. So how do you, if you talk about sustainability and you're really honest about sustainability, then make decisions. To make this wine style, it's actually going to use more electricity, because then if I use more electricity and I don't have hydroelectricity or solar electricity, obviously sustainability becomes a question. So I think the challenge for us is, before we talk about consumers, etc., it's actually a behavioral thing, I think, behavioral message within the wine community that needs to be addressed. A simple example would be, if you go out here this afternoon or tomorrow and you visit the exposition next door and you look at equipment, is water usage, electricity usage of that equipment even a question that you ask? Or what questions do you ask when you buy something? Unless we look at our winery or our farms in that way, where it's not just about the cost, but you also start asking the questions, so this process or this type of equipment, is it going to be efficient? Is it going to use less electricity than the one next door? Then I think we don't have the right attitude or behavioral mindset yet. So it's actually looking at it holistically. And yes, so sensory is very important. It will tell us what the consumer wants, but it might challenge the sustainability of the practices that we're going to follow.
So when we talk about sustainability, we talk about to produce more and better, fundamentally. Produce more and better today, and this deals essentially with resource efficiency. So can I produce more from less? But also produce more and better tomorrow. And this deals more with ecosystem resilience, with the quality of my soil, the quality of the landscape biodiversity. And finally, it deals, and many of you already said today, with the social element, so producing with growers that are actually enjoying good conditions, good knowledge. So at the end, we have these three pillars. And if we concentrate for 1 second on the central one, on the one that talks about the ecosystem resilience, we can reflect on one of the elements that is emerging in several places from the scientists, but also from societal expectations, as really very important for sustainability: the quality of the biodiversity, how we can preserve biodiversity. You know, when you grow your crop in a field, you are just interested in preserving your crop, and you are interested in avoiding any sort of competition. So in the short term, your action is going to reduce, actually, any sort of competition, so any sort of diversity. But if this is allowing you to produce in the short term, in the long term, this is going to reduce your ability to continue to produce more and better. So this is why it's important. But how we can do? Either we grow our crop or we grow biodiversity. Now, 15 years ago, we came with a very simple and pragmatic idea. Looking at the global statistics of agriculture, we discovered that on any sort of farm, on average, there is a 5% of marginal and less productive land. And this is where we developed a very simple concept. That is the concept of field margins. We said, can we grow all around the field some ecological infrastructures? And step by step, we have learned that these ecological infrastructures don't need to be just a biodiversity enhancement per se. They can be truly multifunctional. They can add a lot to the quality of the field by helping against erosion, by helping protecting the water. And we have structured these field margins in a way that they don't compete with production, but are helping production in several different ways. So you see, we have the field with our crop, but we have also the marginal land with the multifunctional field margins. This is one of the elements. And for 15 years, we were very keen just to look at this as the essential element. And then suddenly, finally, we had another very good thought that we believe is perhaps the real breakthrough. I don't know how much you know about the global environmental governance, all the laws and the treaties that are creating the rules that we try to apply in our environmental sustainability. But imagine that it's like a pyramid. You start from the very high-level principles, and then you go through a number of treaties. And one of these is telling you that you are supposed to protect species and the spaces on the farm. And this is a very good, important concept. But what about the connectivity? Because until today, everybody was saying, let's protect whatever is endangered. So if the species are endangered, if the species are endangered, let's create reserve, let's do something to protect. We are trying today to come with a different idea. Let's create corridors. Let's make sure that on each farm we have field margins, that we connect in the landscape. And let's make sure that this connectivity will work to avoid the species and the spaces to be endangered. This is our idea of biodiversity. Thank you very much.
It's a 7-minute. We need to hear him.
Here at the University of California at Davis. Behind me is a building which is a winery and a brewery and a food lab, which was built to be the first LEED Platinum building on the Davis campus and the first LEED Platinum buildings of this kind in the world. That's the first feature of them, and you may hear some noise in the background from a class that's currently running. But we have a vineyard to the west, which is the source of our grapes for our teaching program. We have winemaking classes, which are in session right now. We have brewing classes, and we have a range of other activities that go on in this building. One of the most important features of it, it was designed to become a self-sufficient winery. That is, self-sustainable in energy and self-sustainable in water. And what that means is being independent of a power source from the outside and being independent of a water source from outside. And it's the kind of model that will be used in many different places in the world, which today you probably couldn't have that business or an activity because you'd have to be hooked up to a power line or you'd have to be hooked up to a water line. So this is a model for other people to take and use in lots of other places. One of the key features of this building is the integration of rainwater tanks into the architecture of the building itself. And if you can look behind me, you'll probably see 4 large shiny tanks which capture the rainwater from the roof of this structure. And that's essentially a year's water supply for all of the toilets and landscape water applications that this building uses. And as such, it's not only net zero water, it's actually a water positive building. And we hope that in the future more people will build water positive buildings. The challenge usually comes is we use a lot of water at certain times of the year, in the harvest time, like now, when there's no rainfall. And the rain comes in January, December, maybe February. And the challenge is how do you capture that and how do you store it? And that's a rainwater tank. So this is an example of how to build a building that captures the water from its own roof to be used at another time in the activity that goes on in the building. And how to build rainwater tanks into a structure that makes it acceptable architecturally. And I think that's what we've achieved here at school. To my left is another building which is called the Jess Jackson Sustainable Winery Building. And this is a building which was built to house a number of systems which will allow the winery and the brewery to operate completely independently of outside energy sources, of carbon-based energy sources, and of water sources. And so it will capture, with more rainwater storage tanks, roof water from our main institute building. And that rainwater will be used for the cleaning of all of the equipment within the winery and the brewery and the food labs. One aspect is water and storing it in rainwater tanks. The next aspect is being able to use water more than one time. And this building was designed so that when we wash the tanks in the winery or the brewery, we can actually capture that water, filter it again, and reuse 90% of it a second time, and a third time, and a fourth time, and a fifth time. And if we could go far enough, we could probably use it 10 times. The challenge will be how much energy do we want to spend versus how many times do we want to use it. But if we only used it one more time, the number of storage tanks would be half. And if we used it 5 times, we're now talking about a fifth of the number of storage tanks. And if we could save it use it 10 times, now we're back to a few rainwater tanks. So there's a linkage between rainwater tanks, the number of them, and how many times we use the water. And what we're trying to illustrate here is an example that's applicable in all of the food industries, all of the brewing, fermentation industries of the world, where water to clean equipment is an essential commodity. The last feature of this complex is it was built to be carbon-free. And I don't mean carbon-free by trading and compensation of emissions from grapevines. I mean a building which actually generates all its energy free of a carbon source, solar and hydrogen, and creates a condition under which the fermentation gases from our winemaking and brewing get sequestered on site to be calcium carbonate. That means there is no carbon footprint from this facility as we operate. And there's no other structure like it in the world when you look at the carbon content aspect, the solar on-site generation, the water capture and reuse that these buildings embody. So one of the unique features of the Jackson building is a structure that will house advanced technologies. And those advanced technologies will allow us to recapture the water and use it again. With solar power, refilter the water. And to do that, we need a membrane system which typically would take away dust particles, take away yeast and bacteria, take away viruses, and filter that water under high pressure, powered by solar. And so one of the rooms in Jackson is set up for such a system. Another room is set up for a similar system which will be used to recover the cleaning solutions each time we use them. And so those membrane systems are what we're looking at installing in this location. We already have an opportunity to install a solar thermal hot water system in one of the other rooms. We're in the process of doing a design and installation of another system which will use solar power to create ice cubes, which becomes the cooling water system for the winery. And we're currently looking at proposals and entertaining options that would allow us to put in hydrogen generation from solar on site to create a hydrogen-based fuel cell that'll run in nighttime and off-peak conditions, and a bay which would allow us to use second life lithium batteries to be able to be charged up during the day to actually operate components in the winery at nighttime. And so those technologies are the kinds of things which we can install in a building if we have the building. And the Jackson building is the enabling building that's going to make that possible.
Okay.
The last and perhaps most critical feature of this complex is being able to
No, we need the last and most
take the
critical
water
feature.
from our main institute building, the Robert Mondavi Institute buildings, and instead of directing it back into a creek or a water system, to redirect it to these tanks so that we can transfer that rainwater over here, filter it, and have it become the water system for the winery and the brewery complex.
Okay.
And that's a task we still have to accomplish.
Guys at the back, thank you very much. I think we've more or less seen the film, but it's much more exciting to have you here, Roger Boulton, with us today. Let's give him a round of applause. Welcome, Roger, in our midst.
Thank you, Natasha.
Hi. Now, you've made it very clear that what a lot of our participants here were discussing, that sustainability has to go hand in hand with innovation and science, that is yes, and it's achievable. And I think what's really important for us is to understand how that process came about. How did you decide what to do and how to do it? Because what we've also heard, and it was table one over there that said, we're all doing this innovation stuff with goods and services and products and processes very different. How did you get that decision made? How did you know what to do?
I didn't. I have a background coming from a country which is very limited in water. So there's an Australian piece of understanding droughts and limited water. I'm also fairly in touch with people all over the world in terms of climate and local influences. But I actually took a sabbatical year, which in an academic sense, you normally go and study and do experiments. I spent a lot of time reading and talking and listening and meeting with people to try to understand what systems were available to try to put together an option where a building could be completely independent of power and water grids. And that was close to 15 years ago.
So you were talking to the people who knew which technologies were out there. What about the consumer? We have been talking a lot here today about how important it is to involve the consumer in these decisions on what to do. But some of the stuff that you're doing at Jackson, it's presumably quite difficult to get employees and perhaps other people on board because it's quite novel. It's reusing dirty water.
Well, it's not dirty water. If you understood how we clean it up, it's cleaner than the water that most people have ever drunk. This is the water that would be on the space station. This is the water that you would have injected in you if you went to a hospital and had an intravenous delivery of a drug. So this is very high quality water, but in terms of people and team, we have a very small team of 3 to 4 people. And those people understand and believe in the concepts we're trying to develop. And as such, it's relatively easy when you've got people behind you wanting to do these things, not having to tell them to do them or not forcing them to do them. They're doing them of their own accord. So the adoption is easy when you have a committed group. In terms of consumers, typically there's a distance between a winery and a consumer. And in the United States in particular, it's a very big distance. And so if you were waiting for consumer opinion, it would take a long time to filter back to a winery, and it would take a long time to filter back to an academic, is what should be done. We come from the other end of the tunnel, and maybe we'll meet halfway, but we take the view is we have to do these things before other people realize there's a consensus to do them, because there's an urgency and there's a significant importance in doing it, not waiting for people to say you should do it.
Okay, so this perhaps goes back to one of the dilemmas that I think we've been addressing here, which is on the one hand, we want consumers to dictate the pace and to be empowered and define what sustainability is. On the other hand, we need to educate. And what I'm understanding from you is that you're saying we need to educate by doing, by example, before it's demanded of us.
That's right. That's in the world I come from, that's called leadership. That's where you actually go and do things because you understand they're important to do them. If you wait for everybody to agree with you, you'll probably be delayed by 5 to 10 years. And so I go back to the urgency point. There's a critical need for these things to be done now, and to wait for 5 years would be a shame.
Okay, so I'm hearing...
Sorry, the other aspect that consumers could do is much more related to reporting, transparency, looking at indices, looking at metrics, and calling on companies to actually be more transparent in their behavior in this regard. And that's companies in general, not just publicly traded companies, is how do consumers trust or build the trust in a company that is somewhat withholding information from them, which they would view as important in their decisions for products purchasing. That's probably where the consumer influence can be strongest.
Do you see consumers changing in their understanding of what it is that they can demand with regards to transparency?
At the local and small level, yes. That's a very direct one-on-one kind of connection. In larger scale and distributed and national and international trade, that's now going to be more related to intermediate parties. So import agents, distributors and wholesalers, those people may hear from a consumer, but they may not pass the message on. And so there's an extra lag in the feedback loop in that kind of scale. But at the small scale, I think we see in California, and probably in other countries too, where people will support or not support a local winery based on their understanding and knowledge of what that winery is doing.
Thank you very much for using the term ethical. That was something that was very important here in our discussion. We had some votes where we said, where do we have to do most work to really create a balance on the sustainability pillars? And one very surprising result was that a quarter of the people sitting here said ethics. And that's what you've also just referred to.
Yep. But see, in the world of finance, take the example of a publicly traded company. They would actually issue an annual report to the shareholders, and shareholders would know the financial status of the company in terms of assets and debt and leases and loans, income from sales. These would all be things that in the financial world a shareholder would expect to know. Mm-hmm. We haven't yet arrived at the point where in shareholder publicly traded companies it's generally accepted that you would see the same information about sustainability and sustainable practices with quantified numbers and metrics, not just we're doing something in sustainability. And so there are some companies in the world today that actually in their annual report have a very extensive independently audited metric list. Just like an accounting firm would verify their books, there would be a company that verifies their metrics. And maybe that's what we have to move towards in the future.
Okay, thank you. Now, what we also need to learn from you, because we were crying out a little bit for best practice, for international best practice to be able to be adopted, particularly Table 1, because you're all doing it differently, and you're saying we have a prototype, come and visit us, steal our ideas. What is it that people should know has not worked the way that you intended it? We're being very candid and talking about where have we failed? What's been disappointing for you?
It's not disappointing. So one of the technologies we originally proposed was generating hydrogen on site from solar, storing it for basically 2 nights worth of operation of a fuel cell running on hydrogen. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that in the meantime, in a 5-year period, lithium batteries and second life, that is used lithium batteries from cars, has now become a plausible alternative. And so we're in the process of installing a series of 20 boxes of second life batteries from electric cars in one of the rooms in Jackson. And that will be instead of the hydrogen fuel cell approach. But it'll do the same thing, which is have a non-carbon on-site capture energy system to run the winery at nighttime. So it's not a failure as much as a different alternative, and it came along and it was more compelling. And so that flexibility, I think, is there isn't one answer and one way of doing it. It's what makes most sense at the time, or what makes most sense in the place. I don't believe, so it's not a term I use, which is the term best practices. I've heard people who are cynical say best practices really is what people are already doing. Mm-hmm. And if you get a group of people together who do operations and ask them to define best practices, it'll be based on what they're already doing. So we have to understand that term. It's the best practices of the past. Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily the best practices for the future. And so panelists, I think, and people in the audience will have that discussion tonight over a glass of wine, hopefully, is what's the phrase best practice really mean, and the distinction between what was best practice and what is best practice for the future.
And I'd really like to encourage our students to have that as well, because you've got a lot more future ahead of you to determine that. So what's next? What's next for you if you're looking at the future? Where will you be in 5-10 years' time?
I'll be fishing because I won't be here anymore, and I'll be up in the country throwing lines into rivers trying to catch fish. And but others will go on, and others will actually do more of the same, and probably more of things that we haven't even thought about yet. My role is to actually make that possible for the next generation of people to come and do the kinds of things I would hope that they would do and others would do. So it's setting the stage is really my role at this point, and that's what the development of these buildings has primarily been. In the short term, we're in the process, as I said, of installing these lithium batteries. That's covering the Jackson building entirely with a new generation of solar panels and running the winery day and night off the grid. Zero carbon, completely self-sustainable in water and in energy. And by the 2016 harvest next year, we expect to have that building
operating in that manner. The second aspect of that is the data systems and the hookups so that people could look at those performance curves, look at the current information from anywhere in the world in real time. So I want to be able to demonstrate real-time performance and real-time footprints, and as well as being off the grid from water and energy perspective.
Okay, thank you very much. So what I'm picking up is we need a sense of urgency, wherever it comes from. And not only you as a pioneer, as a leader needs that sense of urgency, your team needs it. And somehow, and it's going to take a little bit longer, we need it with the consumers who are demanding more transparency. So we need that sense of urgency. And when we're talking about how to then do it, I'm hearing we need to have clear goals and a lot of flexibility on how we get there, because we need to keep our options open for the technologies that we don't know about yet, for the best practices that we don't know about yet, because we're still in yesterday.
Yep. There's one other thing, perhaps, Natasha, if I can add, and that's we've got to start talking about footprints. We've got to start talking about shared footprints. Which piece of the carbon footprint belongs to you, and which piece of the carbon footprint belongs to somebody else. But you can't deny what the footprint is, and you need to be ready to say why your piece is what it is. And I think the public wants that kind of conversation. So thinking of carbon footprints, water footprints, energy footprints, chemistry footprints, are the things that we'll have to start to put metrics on and have to be reporting in a fair and honest manner. And so the chemistry of cleaning.
We've just lost the chemistry of cleaning. Hold on, Roger? Can you hear me, Roger? Could you just, yes? Okay, sorry. We didn't quite get to the end of what you were saying. You were saying we need to, the chemistry of cleaning is the last thing we heard.
So that's an area which currently I think is poorly understood. It's viewed that your responsibilities stop at the boundary of the winery property, and that's not the case. And there are components in water. Sodium would be a very good one. Chlorine would be another, but certainly sodium going back onto soil types in certain parts of the world will have to stop. And we've got to understand and own up to that and begin to make that transition. So talking about the chemistry footprint will help us understand that. Not just do we use state-of-the-art cleaning methods, what's the chemistry of those systems in worker exposure and in discharge? We need to have that conversation.
Okay. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Roger Boulton.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for being with us.
This is, it has been a very interesting day. I've been, as you saw me, listening to your discussions and, you know, peeping at the tables. And I tried to identify some very short elements that we can take home as a result of the discussion of today. And these elements are more related to what is new in the discussion as compared to what was 2 years ago. And the first thing that I just, you know, popped out was for me the discussion about communicating on sustainability. And looking at this communication element from all its facets, all its angles, starting with measuring, because you're measuring to communicate the results, the impact you're producing, looking at the target groups to which you want to communicate your progress in sustainability. And we just learned that it's not so simple as you know, the classical communication exercise. It's much more complex because you have policymakers, you have target groups that are not clearly defined, and so on and so forth. And then it's also about building the right messages because consumers need simple messages. They need to be provided with the possibility of a simple choice. And whether you do that with communicating on indicators of sustainability or you do it through a certification scheme, the problem is the same. How do you build your proper messaging in communicating on sustainability? The second element, which I think was coming out mainly in the discussions in the roundtables, was that sustainability has a component which is context specific. Sometimes it's site specific, because you can't compare the conditions in Australia with conditions in Germany or Chile. Sometimes it's product specific. There are different types of products, different categories of products which need to be looked at from the point of view of the possibility of comparing within that product-specific approach. Sometimes it's culture-specific, because we're coming from different cultures with different backgrounds, with different values, and different understanding of the same word sometimes. But there is, for sure, a dimension which is global. And we need to identify that dimension which is global and bring it to this international level of discussion. Then the third message I wanted, and this makes maybe the link to the discussion I'm nibbling, as Natasha was mentioning earlier, I'm nibbling to the topic of tomorrow. And this is about sensory analysis. And my perception of how this has played into the discussion is that the thinking is that using the sensory analysis brings back the consumer into play. So it brings him to the table, and whether it's empowering the consumer or asking him what he wants, is bringing him into the discussion that is important. And this, I think, it helps closing a cycle. It helps closing the cycle by the fact that consumer being at the table is able to influence decisions you take on sustainability. Where do you put your emphasis? Do you put it on water? For sure, if you are in California, you should put it on water, because everybody was so stressed during last summer about the water shortages. So bringing the consumer in will help or will influence your decision system. But this has the potential of creating a virtuous cycle by the fact that the consumer is closing the cycle, bringing the feedback to the sustainability decision-making process, is creating it has the potential of creating a virtuous cycle that would further enhance sustainability. So these were my take-home messages. I hope you agree with them, and you can spread them forward and take them into the discussion of tomorrow.
Thanks very much, Alex. Ettore, you have created a day today. Let's just ask everybody who was a speaker today. Would you stand up, please?
Yeah.
Everybody who was a speaker. Look at this. It's a half-day congress, and you were all speakers. Hey, we have the speakers of the tables as well. We've doubled. They're all very shy.
The rapporteur,
yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, first of all, to all of the speakers that Ettore, you have brought into this. Thank you. Ettore, what are your takeaways, and what are you excited about for tomorrow?
It's very positive, because it's clear that step by step we are moving forward, and it's clear also that we are training ourselves. I mean, because aspects that are really the base of the background of the sustainability, like the transparency, like the consistency, like the traceability, actually is taking form. It's taking form, and today we really clearly we can better identify what communication is, what metric is, and I think we are starting also to be more honest in considering that, for example, metrics are available, because one of the aspects of sustainability to proceed in terms of evolution is really to get slower, to stop and understand what is really the science that and what the people have done up to now, because we need innovation, but also especially we need all the positive experience that have been already done. And that's Roger was as well clear. And then it's clear that we need to have this stakeholder inclusion in our activity. So I mean, it's clear in all the discussion that we get that consumers, but not only the consumers, all the stakeholders need to work together, because I mean it's a matter of sharing. And this story of the sharing information, knowledge, experience, sense of feeling, because sustainability is clear also feeling. So when we talk about ethics, we don't only talk about, no, because it's difficult, then maybe we need other stakeholder workshop just for understanding what ethic means, but at least in very simple way. So the ethic is our sense of feeling, and our sense of feeling is very much influenced by our education, personal education, place where we live, and also our level of experience. For this reason, no, we have to really extrapolate from the terms education, what is information, what is training, because education is something which is more pedagogic. And based on this, I mean, it's clear also that the sensory analysis is a fantastic way to go. So I mean, when we started 2 years ago in considering this aspect, I really have to thank you, all the participants, because it is clear a way to proceed in a better and in the implementation of sustainability, also in consistent way, and also in a way that can be understood from the consumer and not only from the other stakeholders. So, because of course there is a social issue, and this is interesting also from an anthropological point of view, because I mean when we talk about sensory analysis, we really talk about sense of the food, and the sense of the food is something that is based on our culture, but also in our evolution, level of evolution. Sustainability means to evolve. So we are considering sustainability not only because today is an exigence, just looking at the movie that Giuseppe Tasca reported before, which is the common message that is available in the web, but it's something that it has to push us for evolving our society. And this is a great opportunity that we have with sustainability, and this is clear when we consider that we don't produce only food, but produce also public goods and services. And then the story of the infrastructure that was really funny from the table, just beside me. So and this sense of the food is in the wine is maximized. It's maximized because we have this fantastic chain that is tangible to everybody. We have, I mean, the great responsibility, social responsibility of the farmer in making good wine, and then of the enologist, the other people in enhancing. But in reality, everything is in a way that is tangible, and for this reason, wine is very good model also for the other foods and crops. So sensory analysis it is really a challenge for really connecting for the future sustainability for what we have to do, and then of course let's go tomorrow for understanding what sensory analysis is, because actually it's a science. Some time ago was not really considered that for most of the people, but today I mean it is really a good metric that can help the other matrix to be used in the best way.
Fantastic.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ettore Capri.